Chapter 4 of Headlong Hall by Thomas Love Peacock. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Chapter 4. The Grounds.
"I perceive,"
said Mr. Milestone, after they had walked a few paces,
"these grounds have never been touched by the finger of taste."
"This place is quite a wilderness,"
said Squire Headlong.
"for during the latter part of my father's life, while I was finishing my education, he troubled himself about nothing but the cellar, and suffered everything else to go to rack and ruin. A mere wilderness, as you see, even now in December. But in summer a complete nursery of briars, a forest of thistles, a plantation of nettles, without any livestock but goats, that have eaten up all the bark of the trees. Here, you see, is the pedestal of a statue, with only half a leg and 4 toes remaining. There were many here once. When I was a boy, I used to sit every day on the shoulders of Hercules. What became of him, I have never been able to ascertain. Neptune has been lying these 7 years in the dust hole. Atlas had his head knocked off to fit him for propping a shed. And only the day before yesterday we fished Bacchus out of the horse pond."
"My dear sir,"
said Mr. Milestone,
"accord me your permission to wave the wand of enchantment over your grounds. The rocks shall be blown up, the trees shall be cut down, the wilderness and all its goats shall vanish like mist. Pagodas and Chinese bridges, gravel walks and shrubberies, bowling greens, canals, and clumps of larch shall rise upon its ruins. One age, sir, has brought to light the treasures of ancient learning. A second has penetrated into the depths of metaphysics. A third has brought to perfection the science of astronomy. But it was reserved for the exclusive genius of the present times to invent the noble art of picturesque gardening, which has given, as it were, a new tint to the complexion of nature, and a new outline to the physiognomy of the universe."
"Give me leave,"
said Sir Patrick O'Prism,
"to take an exception to that same. Your system of levelling, and trimming and clipping, and docking and clumping, and polishing and cropping and shaving, destroys all the beautiful intricacies of natural luxuriance, and all the graduated harmonies of light and shade, melting into one another, as you see them on that rock over yonder. I never saw one of your improved places, as you call them, and which are nothing but big bowling greens, like sheets of green paper, with a parcel of round clumps scattered over them, like so many spots of ink flicked at random out of a pen, and a solitary animal out here and there looking as if it were lost, that I did not think it was for all the world like Hounslow Heath, thinly sprinkled over with bushes and highwaymen."
"Sir,"
said Mr. Milestone,
"you will have the goodness to make a distinction between the picturesque and the beautiful."
"Will I?"
said Sir Patrick.
"Och, but I won't. For what is beautiful? That what pleases the eye. And what pleases the eye? Tints variously broken and blended. Now tints variously broken and blended constitute the picturesque."
"Allow me,"
said Mr. Gall.
"I distinguish the picturesque and the beautiful, and I add to them, in the laying out of grounds, a third and distinct character, which I call unexpectedness."
"Pray, sir,"
said Mr. Milestone,
"by what name do you distinguish this character when a person walks round the grounds for the second time?"
Mr. Gall bit his lips, and inwardly vowed to revenge himself on Milestone by cutting up his next publication. A long controversy now ensued concerning the picturesque and the beautiful, highly edifying to Squire Headlong. The 3 philosophers stopped as they wound round a projecting point of rock to contemplate a little boat which was gliding over the tranquil surface of the lake below.
The blessings of civilization extend themselves to the meanest individuals of the community,
said Mr. Foster.
That boatman, singing as he sails along, is, I have no doubt, a very happy and, comparatively to the men of his class some centuries back, a very enlightened and intelligent man.
As a partisan of the system of the moral perfectibility of the human race,
said Mr. Escott, who was always considering things on a large scale, and whose thoughts immediately wandered from the lake to the ocean, from the little boat to a ship of the line,
You will probably be able to point out to me the degree of improvement that you suppose to have taken place in the character of a sailor, from the days when Jason sailed through the Cyanian Symplegades, or Noah moored his ark on the summit of Ararat.
If you talk to me of mythological personages,
said Mr. Foster,
of course I cannot meet you on fair grounds.
We will begin, if you please, then,
said Mr. Escott,
no further back than the Battle of Salamis, and I will ask you if you think the mariners of England are, in any one respect, morally or intellectually superior to those who then preserved the liberties of Greece under the direction of Themistocles.
I will venture to assert,
said Mr. Foster,
that considered merely as sailors, which is the only fair mode of judging them, they are as far superior to the Athenians as the structure of our ships is superior to that of theirs. Would not one English 74, think you, have been sufficient to have sunk, burned, and put to flight all the Persian and Grecian vessels in that memorable bay? Contemplate the progress of naval architecture, and the slow but immense succession of concatenated intelligence by which it has gradually attained its present stage of perfectibility. In this, as in all other branches of art and science, every generation possesses all the knowledge of the preceding, and adds to it its own discoveries in a progression to which there seems no limit. The skill requisite to direct these immense machines is proportionate to their magnitude and complicated mechanism, and, therefore, the English sailor, considered merely as a sailor, is vastly superior to the ancient Greek.
You make a distinction, of course,
said Mr. Escott,
between scientific and moral perfectibility?
I conceive,
said Mr. Foster,
that men are virtuous in proportion as they are enlightened, and that as every generation increases in knowledge, it also increases in virtue.
I wish it were so,
said Mr. Escott,
but to me the very reverse appears to be the fact. The progress of knowledge is not general. It is confined to a chosen few of every age. How far these are better than their neighbours we may examine by and by. The mass of mankind is composed of beasts of burden, mere clods and tools of their superiors. By enlarging and complicating your machines you degrade, not exalt, the human animals you employ to direct them. When the boatswain of a 74 pipes all hands to the main tack and flourishes his rope's end over the shoulders of the poor fellows who are tugging at the ropes, do you perceive so dignified, so gratifying a picture as Ulysses exhorting his dear friends, his dear companions, to ply their oars with energy? You will say Ulysses was a fabulous character, but the economy of his vessel is drawn from nature. Every man on board has a character and a will of his own. He talks to them, argues with them, convinces them, and they obey him because they love him and know the reason of his orders. Now, as I have said before, all singleness of character is lost. We divide men into herds like cattle. An individual man, if you strip him of all that is extraneous to himself, is the most wretched and contemptible creature on the face of the earth. The sciences advance, true. A few years of study puts a modern mathematician in possession of more than Newton knew, and leaves him at leisure to add new discoveries of his own. Agreed. But does this make him a Newton? Does it put him in possession of that range of intellect, that grasp of mind, from which the discoveries of Newton sprang? It is mental power that I look for. If you can demonstrate the increase of that, I will give up the field. Energy, independence, individuality, disinterested virtue, active benevolence, self-oblivion, universal philanthropy, these are the qualities I desire to find, and of which I contend that every succeeding age produces fewer examples. I repeat it, there is scarcely such a thing to be found as a single individual man. A few classes compose the whole frame of society, and when you know one of a class, you know the whole of it. Give me the wild man of the woods, the original, unthinking, unscientific, unlogical savage. In him there is at least some good. But in a civilized, sophisticated, cold-blooded, mechanical, calculating slave of Mammon in the world, there is none, absolutely none. Sir, if I fall into a river, an unsophisticated man will jump in and bring me out, but a philosopher will look on with the utmost calmness, and consider me in the light of a projectile, and, making a calculation of the degree of force with which I have impinged the surface, the resistance of the fluid, the velocity of the current, and the depth of the water in that particular place, he will ascertain with the greatest nicety in what part of the mud at the bottom I may probably be found, at any given distance of time from the moment of my first immersion.
Mr. Foster was preparing to reply when the first dinner bell rang, and he immediately commenced a precipitate return towards the house, followed by his two companions, who both admitted that he was now leading the way to at least a temporary period of physical amelioration.
But alas,
added Mr. Escott, after a moment's reflection,
protracted banquets have been copious sources of evil.
End of chapter 4.